joined by my friend, the anonymous poster, seasonal Clickfarm worker. One of the best posters on Twitter, I have to say. Please do follow Clicking Season on Twitter. And we're here to chat about a lot of things, but I think the perfect place to start is an experience that I'm about to embark on, and one that you have some experience with. And I know you've been talking about this online, and we've been chatting about this as well. It's being a parent, having kids. So first, welcome, and then tell me about it.
Thanks, Alex. Well, yeah, I'm actually kind of excited to talk about having kids with you because your due date, when we're recording this, is next week, as I understand it.
Yes,
And
exactly.
so you're about to go into some really interesting areas of your life and like unfold some new dimensions of yourself that
Yeah.
you didn't know you had before. Um, and that's something that I've been going through over the last year and a half. And I'm actually going to have another kid soon. So it's been a really interesting and eye-opening experience for me to do that. Um, yeah. What are some of the things that you're thinking about as you go into this?
Oh man, I'm thinking about essentially about everything and nothing. I think I'm probably having a more severe case of pregnancy brain than most now, especially at the end of the line. Like I catch myself just staring off into space quite a few times a day. But yeah, I don't know. I'm at the point where I'm just really excited. I feel like I've prepared mentally. I'm not really worried about the whole labor thing. I'm actually quite excited in a way. Maybe that's just me being naive and weird about it, but
Oh,
partly because of one of your recommendations. Like I read the Ina May book, the Ina May Gaskin's book on essentially kind of birth prep. I don't remember exactly what it's called, but
there's a couple. There's one called Spiritual Midwifery, which is like the first one, and then there was another one that came later, which is like her guide to childbirth.
yeah, that's the one. I got the guide to childbirth, and I don't know. I found it really calming. I don't know. A lot of people have told me I'm naively optimistic about this whole thing. I hope it doesn't blow up in my face. But I don't know. I've had a really chill pregnancy, and except for some crazy edema now because we're in like a heat wave. I feel absolutely fine. I'm excited about the next phase.
Yeah, my wife and I read that book aloud to each other while we were getting ready for our baby to come, and it was great because the sort of structure of that book largely is about just people recounting what their experience of it was, and this is all happening in like a center where they didn't have access to like advanced medical equipment or anything like that. So it's just people talking about their authentic and natural experiences of having a child, and it just blew my mind how like unrelentingly like beautiful and positive these stories were, and how much that differs from the stories that I typically hear from people that I know who've been sort of uncritically absorbed into the medical system and had a medical experience of childbirth. Um,
Yeah.
Everybody, like a lot of people, seem to have nightmarish, horrible, scarring experiences having kids. And obviously, it's not fully my place because I'm a man. It was my wife who did the real heavy lifting, as it were. But uh, our experience together of this process was just one of the most beautiful moments, like start to finish, of our lives. And it's just a tragedy that so many people don't have that kind of experience when it's totally on the table. And I hope that that's is what it ends up being for you and your husband.
Yeah, I hope so too. I mean, kind of at the beginning of this process, I was pretty much still in the kind of in the medical field, and kind of stuck into the medical paradigm of it. Um, And at the moment, the plan is to we have a birthing center here, and they have like it's a little bit more woo. They've got a pool, you know. It's a bit. We've kind of went in the middle of the road with it, so it's not a complete home birth because it's kind of a thing that people just don't do here for some reason. It's still very medicalized. You'd think that people are a bit more open to just solving this problem with the midwife here in Eastern Europe because we're backward, or at least we're a bit more traditional. But it's actually quite weird because it's you do still have midwives in like faraway places, like in the countryside, rural places, just because they don't have other resources. But I think people, if you were to take the standard childbirth method here for like a upper middle class woman, it would be a scheduled cesarean, maybe a few days before the due date, just to not risk actually having the baby with that one. So
Yeah.
it's I don't know, it's a bit weird. I think it's also we've had a lot of deprivation, during communism. So after communism, we've kind of taken on a lot of the things that we see as luxuries coming from the West, like, things that make everything easy and, shortcuts and medical miracles that we just didn't have or were done badly during communism now are done in the private sector. And it's like, whatever is most high end or most fancy, people will gravitate towards. So I don't know. I feel like I'm probably the most hippie person I know, trying to have a natural birth in a birthing center, like a total weirdo. If I'm not going directly under the knife. So it's I don't know. It's a strange thing, and it's hard to argue for here as well because people are like, oh my God, are you sure you want to go through that? And I'm like, yeah, I probably do.
Well, I think and the part of the reason I thought it'd be interesting to talk about this, it's not just that you're like on the precipice of this important moment, but also that it's such a apt metaphor for what progress really is, and the interventions that we try to make things better without knowing how much we don't know. One of the things that blew my mind when I first learned about it, that nobody ever talks about, is the role of the different psychoactive hormones during childbirth and what they do to you both mentally but also physically. So that the whole process of childbirth is spurred by this incredibly like high dose of oxytocin, which you probably know what oxytocin is, but many people might not. It's the bonding hormone. It's the hormone that is the physical analog of the feeling of attachment. That's the feeling of love that you have, right? So throughout somebody's normal life, they might experience, peak levels of oxytocin, like it occurs after orgasm, or just like, hugging somebody who they really, really love. And they can experience like fairly high levels of it. And it is directly the cause of the feeling. It's a hormone that causes the feeling. But it's also the hormone that moves childbirth along and causes contractions. So really what enables a person to have the process happen at all is that they're having an experience, and there's this mind-body connection. The experience of that love feeling in their bodies is releasing, or is the same as the oxytocin in their bodies, and the oxytocin causes contractions to happen and makes the birth progress. So what are we doing wrong? When you take a woman and put her into a medical setting where the lights are up high, people are moving her around with clipboards and monitors and doing all this stuff, it's very distracting from what she needs to be doing, which is meditating on that feeling, that experience that's happening to her. And so there's so many stories about people who are, their labor is going fine, and then as soon as they get to the hospital, it just shuts off because they're no longer psychologically in the place that causes the physical thing to happen. And then, so we've done the first intervention, which is just moved a woman into another place. So it causes a problem, and then we have to fix the problem. And the way that we do that is by giving them usually Pitocin, which is a synthetic oxytocin that's injected. Mm-hmm. And so that really what that then does is it's just putting the oxytocin into your body, but it doesn't cross the blood-brain barrier because it's supposed to be originating like in your brain, giving you these sensations and feelings, and also going into the body and causing the physical reaction. But suddenly your body is like turned into a meat puppet. It's like an automaton. It's doing this sort of process, but it's divorced from its sort of psycho-spiritual analog. So of course it's horrifying. You're suddenly like being turned into a machine and you're mentally detached from the machine. And that's just a harrowing experience, I think, for a lot of people that I've talked to.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like it's, we have these bodies. We know that there are, I don't know, 20 levers on them that you learn about in medical school, and you can pull these levers in different combinations. But just the sheer complexity of how these things interact at the level of the body, and how many levers we don't understand, the unknown unknowns about the body. It's just a vast field. And I don't know, a lot of the things that I see, medicine and modern science do is just, just throwing monkey wrenches in the machine and in a predictable pattern, and seeing things, change, but in a very brute force way. Like this all seems like almost, I know, butchering people, but subtly, with the a little bit of hormone here, a little bit of that here, and I feel like in cases of extreme distress, I think we know how to fix like crazy problems that occur rarely, but to fix those crazy problems that occur rarely, you intervene in this process that you probably should leave alone, if there are no crazy problems that occur rarely. So I don't know, the book definitely kind of put me a bit on guard with regards to the doctors. I'm like, I don't know, guys. I've had like this whole birth plan with like, which is essentially kind of boils down to just leave me alone if possible.
Yeah, let me concentrate. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and I've made it bilingual, so my husband knows exactly what's written on it, because he's from New Zealand, so he's gonna be, the people here speak English, but if it's like a situation where they're probably under pressure, they're not gonna want to speak English, they're just gonna be chatting around in Romanian. So
that'd be so scary for him. That really sucks.
Yeah, he's trying his best. He's doing the Duolingo, but I don't think he's gonna manage to learn Romanian in time until next week, or whenever it's gonna be needed. Yeah, it's crazy, and it's interesting that you say this is a very good model for a lot of fields that were involved. And I think with COVID, it's been just this incredible case study of this pathology of science, where it's like, okay, we've got these specialists, and they're specialists in a fraction of the problem, which is maybe very specific, related to the virus, and then they're just let loose in remanaging society. It's just insane.
Well, what science seems to be really good for in a way is just solving for X. If you can say what X is, right? We can maximize X. And so, with COVID, it was, we want to reduce death from COVID to zero. There's never any ability on the part of these quote unquote experts to think holistically and see the whole picture and evaluate trade-offs. So of course it is possible to reduce your risk of contracting or dying from COVID to nothing if you just live in a bunker and, never go out and never interact with another human being. Um, but there, there are trade-offs to doing that. And of course, you can make a child come out of a birthing body. You understand how to make that happen. But if you are only like monomaniacally obsessed with just one part of a complex process, then the interventions that you might make sometimes interfere with other parts of the process that you're not really thinking about.
Exactly. And this is just, you think it's like a case study of one, or it's like it's a microcosm, but every microcosm is a macrocosm as well. Like there's so many things that go into this process. Like how was it for you and your wife? I mean, you're already one down, one to go. You have a little bit of experience with this. Like, was it, were you inspired by anime enough to do what's right, or, did it get complicated?
Well, I'm uh, I'm from a large family, and my mom did lots of home births. So actually, was at home when she gave birth to several of my sisters. And when I grew up, we were sort of like I guess hippie back to the land type people. And so I had a comfort with the idea of home birth already. Um, when my wife and I started talking about it, it seemed like something that she was interested in doing, and so we went for it and had just a really peaceful, perfect experience. Um, that's not to say that there wasn't uh, any challenge. I think that obviously my wife went through a very singular and intense experience, but doing it at home was so amazing because uh, everything was comfortable. And, when baby finally came, we could just enjoy that like miraculous moment. The midwives hung out for like an hour and cleaned up everything, and then they left, and there we were suddenly just on our own, which was a real trip. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, it was beautiful.
Yeah, that's amazing, and that's excellent. And during the process, were you kind of sufficiently chill about the fact that the mom was healthy, baby was healthy? Were you kind of keeping that under supervision, or yeah? Because I mean, at least for me, at this point, they're checking me every week, so I get a sonogram every week. Everything's very very much monitored.
I think there are probably lots of different midwives with different sort of ways of working. But one thing that they all have in common is that they're like really sticking their necks out, in the sense that they are taking on this awesome responsibility and they don't take it lightly. So I think that if anything, they tend to err on the side of caution. When something isn't going right, they'll want to whisk you right off to the hospital at the first sign of something um, not not being safe. So I think for most people who are in a city, where I live, there are probably 4 hospitals within, a mile. So it's really nothing to worry about. If something happened, we could be there in a flash.
Yeah. Yeah, it is interesting because a lot of the times you hear about the cases where, oh, okay, a, a home birth, or too little medicalization led to a disaster, and that's the anecdote that you get. But in my family, actually, quite close to me, we had a kind of a malpractice case, where the baby was, deprived of oxygen for a while, and forceps and things like that. So the baby had issues for a long time, and then the child died later in I think at 12. So it was an absolute terrible, malpractice disaster. And that's one of those things where it's like the baby was healthy, and I can imagine, I don't know exactly all the details about this, but there was, quite a lot of force involved in that birth. And which, as far as I understand, wasn't necessarily, warranted. So it's one of those things where, you can see one side of the coin, and people are very scared of that one side of the coin. But it's, all this iatrogenic harm that these hospitals produce. It just doesn't really get registered. Like, for example, in Romania, we don't really have I mean, we have the concept of malpractice, but no one has ever won a malpractice suit in this country. So, the College of Doctors here is very, their ranks are very tight. They don't really, they don't. There's, snitches get stitches in the medical profession. Yeah, so it's really tough to even hear about malpractice, and I think
Yeah,
that's quite the dark side.
right. And I think that's where I was sort of going when I said that midwives are singularly taking on a kind of risk um, by doing this thing with you, um, and taking on that responsibility. They're opening themselves up, at least in the U.S., to catastrophic lawsuits and all this kind of stuff. And so my hat is off to them for being willing to do it.
Yeah.
One of the things that I sort of wanted to draw out is just that when you're having a medical childbirth, it becomes a series of cascading interventions where the first thing that you do might be sort of innocuous, but that might have unforeseen consequences, and then another intervention is necessary to do that, to like fix the problem caused by the first intervention, and then that'll cause another thing, and you end up with just sort of this waterfall of unforeseen consequences that are medically caused and then medically resolved to some degree or other. Hopefully it all works out okay in the end. And this just sort of seems like a metaphor for so much that we have socially, not just in the medical field, but for almost anything that we do to try to improve our lot. I'm sort of I'm like, I guess you'd consider me an ex-progressive or something, just somebody who became incredibly pessimistic about our ability to intervene and make improvements in our lives, because we never are able to see the full picture. And so often the evolved solution, or the received folk wisdom solution, really is already optimized to a great degree. When we start messing with it, just cascading interventions become even more necessary, and we end up in some kind of a weird place. One of the things that is on my mind today, because I was visited by my nephew, he's a little under 1 year old. He's an incredibly beautiful child and bright and very cute. But he's got a flat head. It turns out that half of all children born since 1992 have flat heads. 46% have skull deformities. And this is a medically caused deformity that is a direct result of a public health campaign that we started to, that the medical establishment began to propagate around 1992, called the Back to Sleep campaign, where they put lots and lots of effort into getting everyone to put their child to sleep on their back. This was meant to prevent sudden infant death syndrome, which was an extremely rare and tragic thing, where children sort of die in their sleep and you don't know why. They still don't really know why, and there are lots of things associated with sudden infant death syndrome. But when they made all mothers put all of their children on to sleep on their backs, they were able to reduce it by half. So it went from one case of SIDS per 1,000 births to half a case per 1,000 births from 1991 to like around 2006. That's sort of the graph I was able to find. So that's a success, right? But really, it's only a success if you're able to monomaniacally focus on this one factor. By making this like percentage-wise huge increase, you've halved the number per 1,000 of this tragic event. You've actually caused 46% of infants to have head deformations. Yeah. And if you know anything about putting a kid to sleep, they really don't like to be on their backs. They actually have a thing called a Moro reflex where they'll like fling their arms up in sort of a distressed response whenever they're put on their back. And that's why they need to be swaddled so tightly, to just contain their arms and prevent that really unpleasant falling feeling that they have when they are going on their backs. Babies love to sleep on their stomachs, on their sides. They hate sleeping on their backs. So what you have, in order to go from 1 per 1,000 to 0.5 per 1,000 SIDS deaths, you have lots of miserable children crying and unable to go to sleep because they're in an uncomfortable position and they can't sleep. You have half of them having a skull deformity. The downstream effects we don't know. Yeah. And I just don't think that that's worth it. I don't think that that's necessarily a trade that was wise, given that we don't actually know that this was the thing that made the difference. And even if it was, I'm not sure that it makes sense for a person with a healthy child who doesn't have the horrible other, like, what's the word, for when problems cluster together. The children that die of SIDS have lots of other related issues. Mm-hmm. If you've got a healthy child, it's really not something that's going to happen to you. So just let the child be happy, let him keep his natural head shape, and sleep in a more comfortable way. That's just my opinion.
Yeah, no, it's interesting because I noticed this as well, and we have kind of a generation of people here in Eastern Europe as well, and I used to call that like, oh, I could tell someone's Romanian from the fact that they have this, plagiocephaly, and because I think there was a very similar thing with midwives and doctors here, just telling people to force the baby to sleep on its back. I didn't realize that was a recent thing, or if that was a problem in the West as well. Because my mom, she made sure that she invented like a weird thing because she knew that this could happen. So mm-hmm. she kind of custom made like a pillow for my head just so that it's kind of like a little baby nest or something. So I didn't have this this weird deformity. So yeah, she was careful about it. But so many people have it. Like yeah, it's interesting to hear that. Yeah, this is not just a local thing. Do you think it's?
I think it will happen to you if you trust the experts without thinking about it. If you don't do a little bit of research, this will happen to you.
And it is hard. Like, I mean, I'm all about the research. I like to poke around and in places where I shouldn't. But I think a lot of people just don't have the time, or are swayed by like really dramatic narratives. Because I think this is another aspect to this problem is that SIDS is terrifying. It's there can be all sorts of things that happen with your baby that can go wrong, jaundice and things that are more common, and you might want to think about even more than SIDS. But SIDS is just this stalking, creeping, just sudden infant death syndrome. Oh my god, that's the one thing I want to avoid, because it's like it's completely out of your hands. So I wonder how strongly the narrative power of this creeping evil made people be very attentive to it, and made maybe the government pay more attention to it, because there's so much to be said about what types of risks we pay attention to, because most risks in life, we don't care about. We don't care about traffic accidents, but we care about COVID-19, which is a marginal risk compared to that. So it's interesting, like how, I don't know, the narrative horsepower of a certain type of evil
Yeah.
can push how it's perceived.
Well, that sort of ties into the sort of the clickbait structure of where our attention goes. If energy flows where attention goes, then one of the problems that we have to deal with is that attention goes to certain kinds of things and not others. It goes to juicy things and things that reward our uh, propensity for antagonism and conflict, um, for our ability to separate people into different kinds of tribal groups and demonize the other side. Um, we find these kinds of things really rewarding. So when something is really juicy, like SIDS or dying from COVID, then it's just so rewarding to our lizard brains to like focus on that specific thing to the exclusion of all the other interrelated factors and solve for X. Uh, and I think one of the problems that we have is that in this sort of information connected world where uh, we're finding out what kinds of content go viral and are the most have the highest mimetic velocity, you could say. The things that are the most mimetically juiced end up occupying all of our brain space and our problem solving potential. It's impossible to imagine COVID except as a clickbait event, really.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah, that's a very good way to put it. Especially because especially from the beginning, it was animated by these very powerful visual images of desperate Italian doctors, of people collapsing in the street in Wuhan. It was essentially the George Floyd of disease. People just almost shat themselves because this is the apocalypse and now we have to change everything. So there's a lot of pressure in that direction.
There's a desire for things to be bad also, like it's very boring uh, to live in a world where nothing is really going wrong and there's no thing to compel you, and so we have this hunger for it to be the big one all the time. And one of the things that makes the world seem so clownish is this constant desire on the part of people to take whatever's in front of them and say this is the big one, you
Hmm.
know.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I feel like I think you commented on this as well. People are really missing structure. They're really missing compulsion in a way. Order in their lives. Some event to rally around. Because everything's very much up for grabs. Like norms have been dissolved in the gray goo of liberalism, and now choose your own adventure. But the Swedish buffet of life is hard to parse. So when something big like this happens, it's quite good. And I remember the first weeks of coronavirus. It was scary, but it was also kind of inspiring to see people zooming you out of the blue. Old friends checking in, like
It
what's
was
going
fun
on.
in a way. I mean, I
Yeah.
found it really invigorating. I was like, wow, like the etch a sketch is getting shaken up. This is going to be something new is going to happen here. And because I'm a human being, when things start getting crazy, I get really activated, you know? And it's rewarding to feel that activation. It's funny. I was totally a sucker for those videos in Wuhan of people being like caught with butterfly nets over their heads and like bundled into cars for trying to leave the perimeter or whatever. I thought, okay, this is whatever is going on here is going to be really serious. And the disappointing part on a psychological level for me was almost, I'm exaggerating, but in a sense, it was that it turned out to be a big nothing burger um, compared to what we were making it out to be. It just wasn't. And then we had to sort of go through the motions of pretending for, a year and a half afterward that what we were dealing with was the thing we were afraid it was going to be. But we wanted it to be this big deal so that we would have something to do.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And I think a lot of people are still kind of in that narrative, maybe because they don't want to let go of the dream of coronavirus in a way. The
Coronavirus dream. So
yeah.
like a meaning giving event.
Yeah, because there's just so few of them. You can't really imagine a great war. The Blitz isn't coming, at least not in the form that it came up across London, and the all the stories of solidarity and keep calm and carry on and that type of stuff. That's not coming back. So this was the closest thing we got, and it's like you said, one big nothing burger.
I mean, we're constantly inventing crises, right?
Oh yeah.
I mean, we're in the I don't really even know how many uh, sequential crises we've had, and we just move from one crisis to the next in a desperate search for having a reason to get out of bed or like to make sense out of the world. And I think it's something to do with the way that our communication and information tech is just automatically set up to reward us with inflaming memes. We just get out of bed and look at our phones, and we suddenly start feeling agitated and pursue that feeling of agitation uh, towards somewhere, when then we end up in some very strange place.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And yeah, it's weird because it is a source of meaning, or at least it's a very good meaning simulator. Like when I wake up in the morning and I check my Twitter, see what happened overnight in the American Empire.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, oh my god, it's like 99.9% of all of that stuff has absolutely no effect on my life, on my material day to day living. But man, is it exciting! It's exciting to feel like you're part of something big, and you're communicating with other people who are the movers and shakers and all that. Like to me,
Yeah.
Twitter has been this weird portal to that world, but at the same time I also realize it's very much a simulation of a simulation.
Well, it's very. I mean, for me, it's a mixed bag because I love it so much. I love that sort of feeling of camaraderie of like being a jolly warrior and of you know uh, showing uh, showing the people who are wrong why they're wrong, and just that sort of whole culture of like witty repartee that it has, uh, and it's fun. But it's uh, it's important to remember that that is actually designed to be fun and designed to hook you in.
Yeah.
Um, and that there are just really simple things uh, that maybe people who designed these systems actually didn't know, but we're finding out through experience about what kinds of allegiances people tend to be able to develop, what kinds of fears activate their their inputs. Um, we're like really running a crazy psychological experiment on ourselves, and I think COVID and George Floyd are just two of the recent examples. I mean, Donald Trump was in a large sense just wish fulfillment for people who wanted to experience inflammation. We wanted to experience some kind of being activated by something, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And he was just very good at pushing buttons that make people feel activated, either for or against. So understanding this part of our nature is pretty important if we're going to survive the internet.
Yeah, absolutely. And you made a really interesting point at one juncture, in saying about, the kind of the space that we're in. I would call it, I know, the dissident right, or dissident whatever, weird Twitter. You said that, kind of the schism that's happening right now is, between people who understand. I mean, you mentioned, Foucault and the concept of power knowledge, but it's this idea, of understand narrative. You understand how narrative's created, and what the power behind narrative is, and how people absorb knowledge, and how that's tied into tribes, and how that's tied into belonging. And there's just, it's, the way we construct um, our vision of ourselves is not based on the marketplace of ideas, as much as we'd like to, believe that. And I'm kind of on that side, but you said that this is kind of the big difference now between people who reject this concept and say, okay, no, we cannot accept Foucault and whoever, the idea that anything is constructed. There is the realm of reality, and there's this bullshit French stuff from the 1960s that needs to be burnt to the ground so we can return to, I don't know, the 1980s, and I don't know, the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, or whatever ideas people have. And then there's, kind of that's probably the other side of this, is like the IDW train, where it's like, okay, we're on the march to progress, and the progress is classical liberalism, and we're going to resurrect John Stuart Mill in a hot minute, and it's all going to be fine once we rid ourselves of these illusions, of unreality. So I thought that was really interesting. I don't know if you'd put it this way, but I think you know what I mean. That was I think an older tweet.
Yeah. Well, there's some sort of, I feel a bit torn on this one.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that I think uh, we've uncovered collectively is the knowledge that Foucault was right, in the sense that power tends to be expressed through kinds of knowledge that contains um, the expression of power within it, within that information. Maybe I'm not expressing this very well. I'm not really a Foucault scholar. We should talk to Jeff about this. But there is a desire, I think, on some part of the sort of post-left, post-liberal kind of space, to say, okay, I get it. These sort of critiques of the old free speech, liberalism kinds of ideology is actually correct, in the sense that it's never going to work. Liberalism itself just is sort of a doomed project, and we just want to have a more pro-social kind of illiberalism. The illiberalism that we have now is silly and bad, and what we should have instead is some sort of a good illiberalism that just reasserts pro-social values, and we imagine ourselves capable of directing that. I think that seems like a bit of cope to me, because we could never actually direct that kind of power. That's the lesson from Foucault, is that nobody actually is in charge of this kind of power knowledge. It's just oozing up from everywhere all the time, and it just it happens to us. Nobody gets to be the God Emperor.
So no Caesarism.
It's just, I mean, it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
I think that's a fantasy. I mean, if I could be the king of the world and decide on what social norms were, then I would have some ideas about what I think would be some norms that would be helpful to people, that would help them live better lives. And some of those things would be things that are just sort of looking at what human traditions were like before we went on this sort of atomizing individualist project.
Yeah.
But here's the reality. We actually are already in the world that we're in, and liberalism is unsatisfying in a lot of ways. But there's one thing that's really good at, and what it's really good at is getting people who disagree to coexist peacefully. And I mean, where I live,
For a while.
yeah, I mean, up until it stops working, up until the liberalism disappears, coexistence is possible. But maybe it's just a doomed project, and it's doomed always to eventually disappear.
Yeah, I think
So, I mean, yeah,
you made an interesting point there, about things not being top down. And I feel like both sides of this divide kind of have illusions about how much is possible to be done top down. How much scale can you inject into this, and how much information uh, you would need to actually create these systems where I don't know, whatever integralism or whatever, which is kind of just one flavor of what could be done with like a structured illiberalism that's goal directed and pro social, based in something that's not continuously shifting like liberalism. But it's one that's never going to happen in the current regime. Like this is, I think, probably in terms of any sort of regime that's being talked about recently, the idea of Catholic integralism is probably the biggest LARP, because
it's preposterous.
yeah, that's absolutely impossible. It's a great thought experiment, and I do love to talk about it, and I think it's quite interesting to muse on, but it's not going to happen. And on the same as in the same token, the idea in a way, even the classical liberals have the same illusions of control, because then you hear a lot about like, okay, oh, you need to reject Baudrillard, and it's like the idea that Baudrillard is like some form of I don't know, theologist, and he's imposed these things, like a lot of deconstructivism, and a lot of people in the damned Frankfurt School were just reporting on things that were already in motion. This is a lot of this stuff has happened as a result of technology, as a result of changes that are huge, and that are creating emergent phenomena that have no one's in charge of. Like you said, it's not about rejecting Foucault and burning our Baudrillard books. It's about this is just one guy writing about the end of the world. that's all of history.
Yeah, I mean, progress just keeps coming, and it keeps creating new problems, and then we solve those problems with more progress, which creates new problems, and then that that's just in a way the circle of life. um, I don't I don't think there's any way to hop off this sort of Ferris wheel of progress, and the things that it does to us, and the things that it makes us do next.
Yeah, that's the thing, because like once you put it in motion, there's not really, you can't really not mitigate its effects, and the idea that you're just gonna turn Amish instantly, or I don't know, go back to some imagined past, and only pick out some some cool things to return to, is a bit hard. But I think one thing is making I feel like it's putting a lot of pressure on people to figure out what they should be doing. To me, like, the demographic crisis is something that if we don't figure this out, like, you don't even need, like, I don't know, an asteroid or whatever, chemical bomb or something like that. The great filter is literally our inability to reproduce. It's quite simple, and it's happening. Like, you see, what was it, like Singapore, under one child per woman, South Korea 0.9 or something like that. It's really, really scary what's going on. And the West is the same. I think, what was it, 1.6 now in the US, a country that used to be quite fertile compared to the rest of the West. So I don't know. To me, that's pretty scary. What's your feeling about the demographic end of the world?
Well, I don't really have any optimism about like being able to arrive at political solutions to things, or or to like logic our way out of the situation. But what I do feel optimistic about uh, is that we can actually begin to identify what are some good things, what are some things that make us feel good, and that like provide us as human animals with like a happy, um, just valuable experience. And there's, to me, there's nothing, there's no action that you can take that more strongly indicates that you think life is on balance good than having a kid. I mean, having a child is the thing that you do because you think it's worth it to be here in the first place, And then when you do that, if you do it well, uh, actually you will find that it really is good. Like having kids is just a wonderful, positive thing that you hear so many horrible stories about because people are doing things wrong or doing things poorly. Um, or maybe there's some other more nefarious reasons why we're being bombarded with sort of anti-natalist propaganda all the time. Uh, but yeah, that's just like inherently a good. Having family is a good. Um, being in a situation of reciprocity and love, and complimenting the people around you, giving to them and allowing them to give to you what you can't do for yourself, uh, is just so, on like a somatic level, is such a positive experience that I think the more people who do it, the better things will be.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if I could say the more people, the better, or anything like that. But really, what the political project should be, this is hard to do, it's just figuring out what are the good things in life and then trying to get them. Like our friend Joseph says, politically, my entire politics are being against bad things and for good things. So I can say, like, family, the experience of it is a good thing unless you're doing it wrong.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of people have experiences of family, maybe in this generation, and maybe they did have this in previous generations as well. You know, we kind of are stuck with boomer vision on this one, just because that's kind of the closest one. But I see a lot of people, like I used to be like this. I didn't want to have family because I was like, yeah, the cycle stops with me, and things like that. But then you kind of grow up and you see some better models, and you realize, okay, this is a really worthwhile thing to do, and then you kind of jump into it from a different angle. But I know a lot of people who just kind of skipped out on the experience altogether. It just really don't see the benefit in it. And I don't know, is this, you think this is something that's unique to this last generation, or is it, I don't know, is it tied to autonomy worship, to individualism?
It's kind of hard to figure out, but it does sort of feel like, it feels like it goes along with the loss of a picture of yourself as in service to something larger than you, right? Which would be your community or your family. The replacement of that with an experience that's about yourself as just a sort of an island, a fun maximizer, um, leaves people ultimately not having fun, because it's just such a meaningless experience of your life. But it wasn't. I guess it was a really powerful, just sort of meme complex that sort of led us to that thing. hey, you are an individual, you have uh, an obligation to yourself. And I think replacing that obligation to yourself to with like something like an obligation to the people that surround you is the thing that might be able to pull us back from the brink. Maybe.
Yeah, I completely agree. I also realized that, in a way this obligation fell away because the actual material obligation to other people fell away.
That's
Um,
right.
it's just, we're not, if I don't help my family, they're not going to freeze this winter. It's not like, our cattle are going to die. Someone's going to do the harvest somewhere in Poland and sell me a bread here, 17 steps down the line. I don't think about it. So it's like this disintermediation from the actual necessities of life. I feel like it's really hard to, I don't know, recreate that sense of dependency when you actually aren't dependent.
Right. Maybe another thing that is important for people to reconnect with is a sense of posterity. I mean, this is really Christopher Lash's big point, and it points to like the real deep problem on the left today. I think is that it's just sort of thoroughgoing disregard for um, taking care of the future, which is a funny thing to say because you think of environmentalism, sustainability, stuff like this. But there's a lot more to life than just the whales. I mean, I'm definitely interested in environmental sustainability, but I'm also interested in sustaining the beautiful experiences that were created and passed down to me by the people who came before. Um, and I think I owe that to the people that come after. I think this is sort of one of the frame shifts that comes with having kids uh, is that you actually understand yourself as a part of a lineage, and that you're the lucky recipient of something that people work so hard to get, and that it can be lost. And you want your children to be able to have a piece of it. So maybe that's another angle to go after this individualism thing. It's not just that you need to stop being an island with regard to the people who surround you today, but you're not an island and shouldn't try to be one um, in relation to people from the past and the future.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's this probably ties also into this global homogeneity meme where it's really hard to imagine a lineage that is just like everyone. I'm just part of humanity. It's not. It's I don't know. It's a kind of an alienating, very atomized view of what it is. To because for example, you grow up in kind of this boomery Gen X individualism. Your ties to your family are loosened very much. Because it's all every man for himself. Maybe you're a child of divorce, which is the ultimate formulation of you're on your own, kid. And then you also are like, okay, so maybe I could be part of this nation, maybe I could be part of this neighborhood, maybe and the best thing you can get is you're part of this WeWork and this company that doesn't mind if
You have
you.
a ping pong table.
Exactly, exactly. That's the highest, the cusp of community that you're gonna get. It's I don't know. It's really hard because even now, I mean, I've moved back to my hometown in Romania, and it's been tough even here, to reconnect to community and yeah, just build something that's it's throughout the coronavirus thing. It's become a little bit artificial because we've learned that we can sit in our homes for 6 months without meeting anyone. So, do we really need to see people? Do we really need community?
Yeah, it's Yeah, it's definitely easier when you need to, right? Uh, but maybe you don't realize that you need to uh, do something that's let me see how can I express this. Uh, it's very difficult to fix something that doesn't seem like a problem. You figure out later that it's a problem, right?
Yeah. And it's a problem that just builds, and by building up, that's the problem. Each individual day is not a problem. Your
Yeah, yeah, that's right.
a whole year is a problem. A whole 10 years is a problem.
And one day you wake up and you're just alone. You're just an island, you know, and you what do you do? It's also very difficult, you know. Like how do you recreate this thing that you've realized that you want in a world in which everyone else is opting out, um, and in a world where it's so easy for everyone to sort of frictionlessly sort of slide into consumption mode instead of dealing with each other. Um, the the sort of institutions that supported uh, people knowing each other across generations and across different walks of life have atrophied so much that when you go to a church now, it's usually just, I don't know. I try to go into a church and it's like, you know, my family and three old ladies who are about to expire in a giant empty room. It's just like, okay, this doesn't exist. This isn't a place. Um, I don't think that there's an easy way to fix that thing.
Yeah, definitely not. And it's interesting because you have churches now that have almost been completely swallowed up by essentially woke religion just to keep them alive in a way. It's the new contender religion, and it's the thing that keeps I don't know, all sorts of evangelical directions and on life support.
Yeah.
And it's really hard because you hear this.
One of the horrible things about being like someone who notices the inconsistencies and problems in the sort of progressive mindset is that it actually can be a little alienating. It can be something that separates you from people, and that's a tough pill to swallow.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I know what you mean. Because I've kind of tried my hardest to integrate. Because I really tried to be a good person. I've in line with what was expected of me while I was living in London, where this is the mainstream religion. You either buy in or you're completely dropped out. And then in the end, my only solution was I was too far gone. I couldn't be pulled back into the normalcy with the other people. So yeah, I know what you mean.
But that's why it's why it's so valuable when you meet people and make friendships where you can talk openly and just really you know be yourself.
Yeah, yeah, and that's why I'm really grateful to Twitter. It's really been a big thing for me. Obviously, it's addictive, and I have Twitter dreams sometimes. I wake up 4 in the morning still arguing with, I don't know, Rape Groiper 25 or something like that, and it just happens. But overall, it's been quite the blessing to meet so many cool people.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great one. And also, yeah, thank you for all the advice. You've been a very good Twitter friend to me, and especially with the baby, it's been really invaluable. And yeah, it's I don't really have that many people around me who've had children, because I'm one of these neoliberal atomized people who barely reproduce. So to me, it was
Right. Yeah, we
yeah.
could, we could re-enter it. Like it's the same. It's sort of like everything else, it's a bunch of nerds re-engineering what normies used to know.
Exactly.
You
Yeah.
know,
We're reinventing the wheel, being real trad
big
about
time.
it.
Yeah, having to reinvent that wheel. Like, how do we like? What do you do? How do you go to a school? What's nursing? We'll figure it out.
Yeah, exactly. We'll Google it.
We'll Google it. Literally, that is what we will do.
Yeah, I mean it's been useful. Or we'll ask our Twitter friends who've had this experience recently. So you might be getting some strange hours questions about very detailed things about babies.
I
Uh,
love it. Yeah.
that's perfect. So before I let you go, I will ask you the question of the show, which everyone gets. And it's do you have any subversive thinker that you'd like to recommend that people check out? Someone who might not be getting enough of the spotlight and you think deserves a bit more credit.
Well, it's so hard to pick one, but maybe somebody who I think um, is not getting discussed enough and that might be a lot of fun for folks to read if they so choose is Eric Neumann. Um, I, I believe we've talked a little bit about him before, but the reason that I found him compelling was because really doing he's integrating a psychology sort of project with the sort of German tradition of philology, like the sort of tradition that moves from like Bachofen to Nietzsche and to Jung, um, as well as sort of comparative study of religion. His great books are The Origins and History of Consciousness and The Great Mother. And these are a lot of fun to read because really what they're trying to understand is what is the psychology of religion, um,
Mm-hmm.
what's going on psychologically in religion. As we have noticed, woke uh, sort of ideology has a religious structure to it. And reading Neumann, it's really amazing because he sets all these different, disparate in time and place religions side by side and shows how they operate in the same way, um, who their archetypal figures are, and the sort of psychological forces at play that make them feel so important and energizing. So it's a little bit of an integrative project. Um, just a couple of teasers that might make people interested in this. He talks a lot about the importance of human sacrifice, which is really like integral. It's at the center of every religion, really,
Mm.
um, and the sort of the sacrificed figure, um, whether it's Dionysus, Jesus, Quetzalcoatl, um, or George Floyd, there are these things that go together in a figure who's like sort of this. It's always a male figure who represents some sort of um, it's often an enjoyer in the sense of like Dionysus, he's the god of wine, but not necessarily. But in Neumann's picture, it's all sort of a way of playing out sort of masculine and feminine uh, sort of archetypes of um, reproduction, really. So it's a sort of the male figure who dies in order to give life. Um, and there's so much of the stuff uh, that begins to blow your mind as you look across different religions and how much they'll have different content, but they'll have a lot of interestingly linked um, forces underlying the sort of surface details. And so if we want to understand what is going on with the sort of often mystifying contemporary religion that we're inundated with, comparing it with the sort of inner structure of these other religions and how it works with people's psychology is a lot of fun. So I would say people should check out those books.
Okay, Eric Norman. I think it's interesting because a lot of people started speaking about Girard in this context as well. Like Jeff Schollenberger has a new course on Girard, and he's kind of mining similar territory and with the medic theory and the concept of the scapegoat, which is essentially the sacrificial, typically male character that needs to take on the sins of the world. And there was another book, the Golden Bough by Fraser, also covers kind of the same territory about kind of the inner structure of religion, but also the inner structure of taboo, of the thing that shall not be named in religions, which I kind of would recommend people read as well and check out as well in this context. It's a really interesting book. But also, I have the Great Mother as a book, but I haven't cracked it yet. But it's definitely one I'll check out soon.
Have you checked out all the images in the back? There's like a bunch of plates showing. Just open it up, flip to the very back, and just like sort of flip through, and you'll see a lot of like religious artworks from different cultures illustrating the same like motifs over and over again. So even without beginning to read a word, that book is instantly gratifying.
Okay, perfect. Well, I will check it out. I hope they're visible on Kindle because
Oh yeah.
I live
Oh
in.
no, you have like a fake book.
Yeah, I know. I live here in the backwoods, and it's just almost impossible to get originals of any worthwhile book. I mean, I could get your Malcolm Gladwell's and whatever,
Yeah, yeah.
but nothing really good. So yeah, unfortunately, I'm relegated to fake books.
Wait,
Um,
he's really the source for almost all of Paglia. So I kind of found him through Paglia after reading uh, most of Sexual Persona, and I read also an essay of hers about him, and he's sort of like her primary source. He's also Jordan Peterson's primary source. He's sort of like this unacknowledged forebear to a lot of people that have been active in discourse over the past decade. But he's better than all these guys.
Okay, well, that is a ringing endorsement because everyone loves Polya, and everyone used to love Jordan Peterson until about 5 minutes ago. So, yeah, I'll definitely check it out. And yeah, I also want to thank you so much for coming on the show. It was lovely to finally speak with you after chatting on Twitter for a while. And yeah, it's always nice to to put a voice to the avatar.
It is nice.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for coming on.